Hi guys, I'm Pete Lynch. I'm the master blender with WhistlePig Whiskey, and welcome to the WhistlePig Farm. Today we're going to be embarking on a truly special journey, blending together the first ever edition of Homestock, brought to you by WhistlePig and Flaviar. This is going to be one for the ages. We're going to taste whiskeys we've never seen before. We're going to blend up something truly special, and we're going to work together as a team to decide on what our best blend is to bring to the world. Let's dive right in. Cheers. All right, guys, I'm excited. I've got a fun box here, about to open it up, see what we have inside. You guys should all have a similar box to this. Oh, yeah. This is where the magic begins, my friends. Look at that. So inside your box, you should have one branded WhistlePig box, which we'll open in just a moment. And just as importantly, your set of instructions, which will help you achieve the most perfect blend you possibly could make. Here we have our lovely blending kit. And would you look at the beauties inside?
In our blending kits, we have a 25 ml graduated cylinder with a pipette, a WhistlePig whiskey branded tasting glass, and 50 ml bottles of wheat, rye, and barley whiskey.
This might harken back to 7th grade science class for a bunch of you, but one of our main tools here is a graduated cylinder and a pipette dropper. These are vitally important to us for several reasons. Pipettes and graduated cylinders have milliliter markers, which will allow us to carefully measure out 1 milliliter, 2 milliliter at a time, which is vitally important here because of the small volumes that we're dealing with. Think about it like you're a mad scientist, pretend you have a lab coat on. I'm sure some of you actually do have lab coats on at home, so throw those on. These are going to be your best friends the next couple hours, the next week. We wouldn't be anywhere without our branded WhistlePig tasting glass, designed so that it facilitates aromatic release. We'll get a really nice hit of that aroma, and it also looks pretty damn nice, I think. And where would we be without our whiskeys? You should have 6 50 milliliter nips in your box, one each of the wheat whiskey, the rye whiskey, and the barley whiskey. That's right, you heard it, wheat and barley whiskey coming from WhistlePig. Not something that we've seen from WhistlePig whiskey before, something we may see in the future, but something we're absolutely working with today, here and now. So step one to blending is getting to know your whiskey. It's incredibly important to get to know your whiskeys as well as you possibly can before you start blending. This gives us a great idea of how these whiskeys will work in the blend. If something's a bit spicier, you might not be as aggressive with the percentage because it might overwhelm the blend. If something's a bit too sweet, you might want to tamp that down a little bit or use it to round out a blend. Form this picture of how these whiskeys work for you in terms of flavor profile. To keep it simple, you can go deep. Is it sweet? Is it spicy? Does it have the notes I'm looking for? And never forget, we learned through blending that 1 + 1 does not always equal 2. You may think that the rye and the wheat blend beautifully together, but suddenly you do a blend with them, the percentages you thought, and you're way off base. To get to know your whiskeys, we obviously have to taste them. Now, one very vital part of being a blender is working with small volumes. Believe it or not, for every sample I pull from the barrel, that's a couple bottles that we can't give you guys out there. Simple cost savings on that front. With that in mind, we're going to have to be very careful about conserving our whiskeys. And speaking about conserving, I'm going to ask you right now to take your 3 extra sets of nips, just set them aside. We will not be opening these today. We will be using these for the second blending session, which will be a live stream. I'm incredibly looking forward to it. Cannot wait to see the fantastic blends that you guys will be submitting. Step 1, taste. This is going to be our first opportunity to use our wonderful scientific tools. You'll notice your pipette has millimeter markings up to 3 milliliters. This is going to be very handy for a few reasons. You'll notice that your graduated cylinder has millimeter markings starting at 5 milliliters going up to 25. Here I've got my 5-year-old wheat whiskey from WhistlePig. We're going to use this pipette dropper to measure out carefully 10 milliliters. Pulling up 3 milliliters at a time and measuring into my graduated cylinder until I hit the 10 milliliter mark. Why only 10 milliliters, Pete? That seems like a pretty small amount. You're not wrong, but that's all we should need to get a decent idea of our whiskey. As we blend them out, we'll get a better idea, seeing how they mesh with other components in a blend, seeing what flavors are brought out, seeing what flavors are subdued. But for now, we're going to start small, we're going to taste small, and we're going to get a great idea of what we're working with here. So I am starting here with my wheat whiskey. 86 proof. It allows us to retain a lot of that viscous mouthfeel character without sacrificing that cleanliness, that smooth finish, if you will. So now I've got 10 milliliters of my wheat whiskey here. Begin to taste. Now it's time to taste. I'm gonna coat my glass with this whiskey just to ensure the aromatics can evenly spread. Step one of tasting is always getting to know the aroma. Everyone has a different way they like to taste. I'm not going to use this opportunity to try to tell you if you're right or wrong. I'm just going to tell you if it works for you, it's probably right. Appreciate the nose. What are we working with here? On this wheat whiskey, I'm getting loads of toasted oak. Nutty aromatics, some great ripe berries, and that classic sort of sweeter, rounded profile that wheat is known for. That's a whiskey that you just need to go and dive in and take a sip of. Now, for my first sip, I'm going to take the smallest sip I've ever taken in my life. The reason for that is I'm trying to acclimatize my palate to the whiskey. I'll get an idea of the flavor profile, but it's really on my subsequent sips that I'll be getting to know this whiskey even better. Again, we're working with 10 milliliters here, so it's going to be vitally important to conserve this whiskey. Man, that's good. It's got some great, surprising spice to it on the palate. Finishes with that spice character as well, but we're not losing that great lactonic mouthfeel, as we call it. This viscosity, this palate weight, that smooth, sweet component of the wheat flavor profile, meshing together with the extracts from the barrel, give us a rounded whiskey that isn't just one note. This, for me, in a blend, is probably going to be a flavoring component, which means that it's not going to be the majority on a percent basis. If we put this in at too high of a percentage, it may overwhelm the other whiskeys. However, I'm not saying you shouldn't try it. In fact, that may make the best version of Homestock. This wheat whiskey is 5 years old. It's 100% wheat in the mash bill. Now, what's special about this whiskey is it was aged in a de-char barrel. What that means is, quite simply, we've taken a used whiskey barrel, we've had our cooperage partners scrape the inside off to remove that existing char layer and that wood that's been sort of sapped away. They re-char it over an open fire to rejuvenate that barrel, gives it a little bit more of a spice character, serves to clean up the whiskey a bit more, gives us some of those toasted notes as well, and gives us really something we're not used to. Not too far from the flavor profiles that we're familiar with, but definitely something that's gonna make you think a little bit. Now, I'd recommend sticking to at most 60% of the blend for the wheat component. You may find that 60% is your sweet spot. You might find that 5% is your sweet spot. A lot of you will work in between, but our suggested parameters are 0 to 60% percentage of the blend. Next up, I'm tasting our 5-year-old barley whiskey. Now, it's worth noting that this is straight unmalted barley, not something that we're so used to in the world of whiskey, but something that's absolutely worth trying and trialing. Now, again, I've cleaned out my graduated cylinder, and I'm going to very carefully measure out, using my pipette, 10 milliliters of the barley whiskey. Again, we're bottling at 86 proof on this barley whiskey here for the same reasons. In fact, it's very important as a blender to blend at the same proof. Now, we can use some pretty simple equations to get around that, but if I blend together 50% of a component at 80 proof and 50% of a component at 100 proof, the flavor contribution of the 100 proof component is going to be a lot more than 50%. We've added in significantly more of that whiskey, because if you think about it, an 80 proof whiskey is almost just a 100 proof whiskey with more water in it, aka less intensity of flavor. Very important to stick to the same proof, otherwise you're going to make a blend that you think tastes a certain way, but in reality it tastes a little bit different than you might have expected. Now, when we blend, it's very important to stick to a few key points. Number one is small, round numbers. Again, we're dealing with some pretty small volumes here. And we're only going to be making 10 milliliter blends. We're going to take small percentages of each of these bottles and make a blend that is totaling just 10 milliliters. So it's going to be very important to stick to rounder numbers, say 10%, 15%, 20%, because that translates to just 1 mil for 10%, 2 mils for 20%. However, if you go for 13.77%, it's going to be a bit harder to translate in the measuring, and I'd say you're going to have a very hard time measuring out such precise numbers with the tools we have at hand. Your palate might be able to appreciate that difference, but it's going to be very difficult to replicate the flavors you just made. For those reasons, it's very important to stick to round numbers when blending so that we can replicate our experiments. Now, I've measured out 10 milliliters of my barley whiskey very carefully, and it's time to taste. Once again, I'm going to coat this glass with the whiskey, just to make sure I'm coating all sides of this glass and hitting those aromatics. Ooh, now this barley is one for the ages here. Really nice, sweet, fruity nose, not in your face punchy, but just very present, with this really nice almond, marzipan-like note to it as well. We're not losing that toasted oak, creamy vanilla character as well on the nose. We're seeing some similar notes to the wheat whiskey as well, given the fact that they were both aged in a dechar rechar barrel. It's going to be very interesting to note where the flavor differentiates. And where that flavor differentiates for me is coming across on the nose with a bit more of a tropical fruit rather than those ripe berries we got on the wheat. Additionally, it's got a little bit more of this nice sort of vegetal nature to it. I can tell this is going to have some really nice mouthfeel to it. Creamy, silky, smooth, a bit of spice, but loads of baking spices. We're talking cinnamon, allspice, even some anise in there on the herbal side. Sticking with that nutty backbone as well. This is a whiskey that I just want to take another sip of, and in fact, I think I will. The finish too. It's not a finish that punches you in the face, wallops you over the head, slugs you goodnight, kicks you in the nuts, slaps you right in the face. That's mean and rough. Now, it's not a finish that punches like a mean brother would. It's a finish that punches like a good buddy at work would. You know, he's there for you. He's letting you know he's there, no matter what it is. Maybe it's just beers on Friday, but hey, maybe your wife just left you. That's this barley whiskey for me. It's there, it's present, it's not overwhelming. This barley for me is going to be a great base component. What that means is it's going to accept other flavors quite well. It's got a very strong base of flavor, but it's not going to necessarily overwhelm every other thing it's mixed with. For that reason, I may be seeing a heavier percentage of barley. However, I'd also spin that on its head and say, this barley works beautifully as a flavoring component. You capitalize on those tropical fruit notes, on that creamy mouthfeel, on the vanilla on the nose, and you can really add some sweeter, rounded, baking spice heavy notes to your whiskey. Cheers. Last but certainly not least, we have our WhistlePig 4-year-old rye whiskey. Now, this whiskey is 100% rye by mash bill. We're looking at all 100% grain bills here, by the way. Pretty exciting stuff. 100% wheat, 100% raw barley, 100% raw rye. We're gonna get a lot of grain forward character here. As blenders, we love components like this because we know they're going to stick to at least some realm of flavor. Wheat's probably going to be a bit softer, be a bit sweeter. But if you involve something like a dechar rechar barrel, you might get a bit of a more complex character out of that. Same goes for the barley. With the rye, we're looking at something a little bit closer to home. If you're familiar with Farm Stock 3, this whiskey might taste a bit similar to you. Again, I'm going to carefully measure out 10 milliliters. With my pipette into my graduated cylinder. I know this is the most exciting part, and I know this will get cut out. All right, I've carefully measured out 10 milliliters of my rye whiskey. Now it's time to taste. Swirl around, coat that glass. Right off the bat, on the nose, we're getting loads of Vermont oak. That Vermont oak character is going to come across in the vanilla aromatics. Some of that oak spice and that toasted oak character. This sort of creamy caramel note as well. But this is very much a rye as well. We get some of the herbal tones coming from rye. We get some of those baking spices with the clove and the nutmeg. Some anise coming in as well. A little bit of cinnamon sugar too. Rye can easily sip quite a bit sweeter than you might expect. Depending on the type of barrel you're using, for us at WhistlePig, we are incorporating not just charred, but toasted barrels as well. That's going to give us a bit of a more rounded flavor profile, and in the specific case of this rye, we're going to get some sweeter wood sugars coming out as well, some toastier oak notes, giving us some of these great aromatics and some wonderful mouthfeel. But let's not just take my word for it, let's have a sip. Oh yeah. So, this is going to surprise you a bit on the palate. It's not an explosion of spice that you might expect. In fact, we're getting a good amount of these oak extracts on the sweeter side with these mouthfeel components, with these vanillins, with these caramels as well. They linger on the mid palate, they linger on the finish. I'm getting that cinnamon sugar note again in a huge way, and it's sticking with me. It's fantastic. Off the bat, this is screaming out to me base whiskey for a lot of reasons. The nose itself, we've got these wonderful wood sugars, but we've got room to grow. Some of that spice character from the wheat could play beautifully here. Some of those sort of tropical fruits from the barley really could serve to complement that sweetness and give us a rounded sweet profile. On the palate, that creamy mouthfeel, very, very pleasant. Not as spicy as you might expect. I might include some wheat here to round out that flavor profile, amp up the spice a bit. I'd use the barley as that little top note. Add in some of those sweeter tropical fruits, some of those nuttier notes as well, and really add that cleaner finish, amp things up quite a bit. All right guys, now that we've gotten to know our whiskeys rather intimately, it's time to see how they blend together. Not all whiskeys play nicely together. You know, it's like 3 siblings. I mean, I grew up with 4 brothers, so this is maybe a little bit personal. 3 siblings, you know, yeah, they get along if they have to in certain situations, in certain niche, specific instances, but if you just throw them together like that willy-nilly in a room, guess what? They're gonna fight. Things aren't gonna end well. Same's gonna be true when it comes to whiskeys. We have to treat them as their own individual person. Each person has to be treated a little bit differently to get the most out of them. To start the blending process, we're going to remember that 10 milliliter number. We're making blends that are 10 milliliter in volume, which means that 10 mils equals 100% of the blend. So 1 milliliter equals 10% of that blend. Keep it nice and easy. I would highly recommend grabbing a pad of paper and a pen, just jotting down notes as you go. Additionally, if you have more than one glass, it might be difficult to remember what's in each glass. So some sort of little marker, be it a post-it note, or you can even write on the glass itself, just to keep you honest. I can speak from experience and say I've had to dump a lot of whiskey out because I just can't remember what it is. So, to begin with the blending process, I'm gonna start somewhere familiar. Tasting these whiskeys, I started to form an idea of how I thought the flavor could best come across. That blend is going to look like something potentially completely different than what you are thinking at home now. There's only one way to find out. I'm gonna start with my rye. The rye for me, as I mentioned, is a great base component. It's really accepting of flavor. It's got a lot of vibrancy of flavor, but it doesn't have the most intense flavor, which as blenders is a great thing. Our goal here is to make something that is better than the sum of the parts. This rye is fantastic. The sweet, I love it. The barley, give me some more. But we're gonna make something that is gonna make me just say, you know what? I don't even need those. Give me Homestock, please, and thank you. For my first blend, I'm gonna start with the rye as the base component. Now, I'm gonna start with 60% of this rye whiskey as my base component. Again, it's going to accept other flavors well. It's got a really nice base to it with some of those sweeter, creamier notes. However, we're not gonna know for sure until we actually blend it and taste it. So to add in 60% of this rye, I'm going to carefully measure out 6 milliliters using this dropper. And once I've done that, this is very important, guys. Always, always, always measure one component, dump it out, and then measure your next component. Don't measure one component and then measure another one on top, simply because you can't take it out once you put it in. Simple as that. So I've measured in 6 mils of my rye for my 60% component. Now, I was really liking that wheat with the spice profile, with that dechar rechar character, and with some of those sweeter berry notes. I'm gonna use my wheat as my second component, as my heavy flavoring impact. 30% of this wheat, 3 mils, should get me that flavor I'm looking for. But again, we're not gonna quite know until we've tasted it. And full disclosure, I've never made these blends. I have no idea what this is gonna taste like in reality. So we are doing this for the first time together, my friends. So see what I almost just did there? Almost just measured on top of something. That's a no-no. Measure into my graduated cylinder. That's my 3 mils. As an aside, our cylinders begin at 5 milliliters. For that reason, if we're measuring anything under 5 milliliters, I would absolutely go off just the markers on the pipette. So I've measured out my 30%, 3 mils, into my cylinder. I will now pour it in to my glass. Last but certainly not least, I really loved those nutty notes coming across in the barley, some of that spice character with the baking spices, the nutmeg and the clove, and the cinnamon as well. So I'm gonna add in 1 mil at 10% just to round things off, really finish off the flavor profile, if you will. And then we're gonna taste and see just how I've done. So here's my 1 mil. I will place this 1 mil directly into the glass as I'm not measuring more out. And I have my version, number 1, of Homestock. Just gonna swirl it a bit to make sure all these whiskeys are mixing together. And I'm gonna start tasting. However, I'm not going to just slug this down, taste it all. I'm going to follow the same steps that I did when tasting the individual whiskeys, and I'm also going to make sure to save some of this. I'll taste it once, twice, and then I'll come back to it once I've made some other blends. There's a very good reason for that. I make this blend, I taste it, it's amazing. I make another blend, I taste it, it's amazing. But I taste them against each other, and I realize blend 1's really not that good when you factor in the flavor of blend 2. You have to keep a little bit of the blends you've made so you can test them against your future blends. Right off the bat for me, on the nose, I'm getting that wonderful cinnamon sugar aromatic from the rye, coupled with some of those sweeter, softer notes from the wheat, and some of those fruity tropical notes coming from the barley. Really hitting the notes I wanted to on the nose, which is always a good thing. As blenders, we taste our whiskeys, we formulate an idea of how that flavor works for us, and we can then think about how those flavors will work together. But until we actually put it in the glass, we don't quite know. I'm very happy to say I've achieved the aromatics I was looking for. Let's move on to the palate. I'm hoping to get some really nice creaminess here, a smooth mouthfeel with a lot of that spice character from that wheat, perhaps a little bit of that marzipan character from the barley. We're gonna find out. And I'm also expecting a nice spicy and clean, lingering finish. Again, I'll take a very small sip here just to acclimatize my palate to the flavor. Oh yeah, okay, that's doing it for me in big ways, but I'm surprised in a few ways as well. Wonderful, wonderful palate weight there. Beautiful flavors. We're getting a lot of that sweeter character that we're getting out of the Vermont oak with the vanilla, with the caramel, with those wood sugars, that cinnamon sugar we mentioned a couple times now. But it's not just stopping there. The spice is coming in on the side palate from the wheat. That barley comes in on the finish very nicely. The finish lasts and lasts. It's not aggressive, but it's there. This is a great starting off point for me. I know that I can definitely improve upon this. I have some thoughts. I'm going to try a couple things now. I'm going to make another blend that is purposely quite different from this, just to see what we're working with here. My next blend is going to be heavy on the barley. I'm effectively going to swap out two components. You don't have to necessarily do this, but it's a great way to do a controlled experiment. So now I'm gonna make a blend that is markedly different from the blend I just made. That's gonna tell us a number of things. Number one, we're gonna see if we're in the right direction in the first place. Is this where we want to be with component percentages? If whiskey number 2 tastes miles better, then we're probably not. If whiskey number 2 tastes much worse, then we're probably in a pretty good spot here. I'm going to switch my percentages of barley and rye, doing a controlled experiment by just swapping one variable, 2 in this case, but one aspect of this blend is being switched. So we'll have a 60% barley, 30% wheat, and 10% rye. So rather than 60% rye, I'll add in 60% of the barley whiskey, 6 mils, and I will measure that into my graduated cylinder. And pour into my glass. I'm gonna repeat for next the rye. Rye is gonna be 10%, so I'll just add 1 milliliter of that directly to the glass. And last but not least, we have our wheat whiskey, which again is coming in at 30%, 3 mils. I will add that as well directly to the glass, given my 3 milliliter markings on my pipette. And voila, we have Pete Lynch's Homestock number 2. Again, I mentioned it's important to use post-it notes, to use markations of some form, to know what whiskeys you're working with. I'm going to be very simple here. I know that on my left I have my rye heavy, I know that on my right I have my barley heavy. I'm only making 2 blends myself right now, so I don't have to get too in depth. I would highly stress again, don't be like me. Write something down, please. Immediately off the nose, I'm getting a wildly different whiskey. And that's the goal here. Is it better? Is it worse, though? Remains to be seen. A lot of those nutty characters are coming through. Some of this sort of almost vegetal side of the barley that comes across in a really sort of nice herbal sense hits me on the nose. Some of that sweetness from the wheat, not much of that sweetness from the rye. That's telling me the rye is really getting covered up here quite a bit, which I'll make a note of for future blends. If I'm using the rye as a flavor component, 10% might not quite be enough. Some of that spice character from the wheat is shining through a little bit more strongly. Now, I might not expect that given that I've significantly reduced the amount of rye. However, let's not forget, the barley had a great spice character to it in the first place. So by switching those percentages, we are very much increasing that spice character. Additionally, by removing the percentage of rye, we're lowering that sweeter cinnamon, sugar, barrel extract side of the flavor. Let's move on to the palate here, because I think this one's gonna be something delicious. Oh yeah, I'm getting those sweet notes up front. I'm getting a really nice spice profile. It's giving me even more palate weight than the rye did. Number 2 really shines. Whereas whiskey number 1 had a pleasant, light yet lingering finish, whiskey number 2 has a bit of a heftier finish. Again, the spice character of the barley and that wheat from that dechar rechar coming into play here on that finish, bringing in the oak spice and really giving us something to think about and savor as we sip. So my next step with these whiskeys is, how do I meet in the middle? What direction am I headed? I like certain things about the rye heavy. I like certain things about the barley heavy. I haven't tried wheat heavy. That might be my next step. However, I do know based off my 2 blends here that wheat's giving me a lot of that spice character. And based off the reduction of rye in whiskey number 2, the rye doesn't carry through so much when that spice character is a bit heavier. So I might be thinking, okay, definitely need more than 10% rye. I'd like to try something with less barley, and maybe I'll play around that wheat percentage a bit. We'll try whiskey 1, we'll try whiskey 2, we'll try whiskey 3, and we'll build this kind of map chronicling our journey to that perfect blend, Homestock. Oh, we were heading in one direction for whiskey number 2, but then we realized we need to take a left and not a right, and we have to go straight instead of turning around, and we've arrived. I'm so excited to be here with you on this journey, crafting the perfect version of Homestock. I've hopefully given you a bit of a jumping off point here in terms of what the project is, in terms of blending on the whole, how we do it, what we're doing specific to this project, and I hope I've given you some jumping off points for maybe what you're thinking about with the whiskeys themselves, percentage-wise. Now, I would definitely recommend, just because I did it, doesn't mean you should do it. Try something different than what I've done. One of the things I'm most excited to do is receive all of your submissions, make all these blends myself, taste through them, and really get to know this whiskey even better than I thought I ever could. Now, this is not the last step of this project, not even close. We'll have you blend together your ideal Homestock blend, which by blend 4, now keep in mind, we're tasting 10 milliliters, we're using 10 milliliters to make blends. Ostensibly, you should be able to make a minimum of 4 blends, unless you make a blend that is more than 10 milliliters, using more than 10 mils of any component. Thanks so much for spending some time with me, sitting on your couch, blending some wonderful whiskeys at home, and again, our first ever virtual blending experience brought to you by WhistlePig and Flaviar, but we're not done quite here. If you follow the link on your wonderful handy insert here, you will be able to submit your final blends, which we will then vote on and create the perfect version of Homestock together in our next session. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to tune in, see all you guys, hear from you, and work together to create Homestock. Blend number 1 it is. Cheers.